She married the broke blacksmith, then learned he owned half the valley. The hammer was the last thing I set down before I met her. Not because it matters that way, not some sign I'd later point to. It's just that I remember the weight of it leaving my hand, the way the iron rang against the anvil ledge and went quiet, and then I looked up, and she was standing in the doorway of the forge with a horse's bridle draped over one arm, and a look on her face that said she'd been standing there a minute already, and hadn't decided yet whether to interrupt. I said, "You need that fixed or replaced." She looked at the bridle like she was seeing it for the first time. "Fixed, I think. The keeper loops cracked through." I took it from her. Old tack, good leather, somebody had cared for it a long time. The crack was where she said, not a clean break, more like it had been working loose for months and finally gave. I could fix it. Wouldn't be the same as new, but it would hold. "Come back tomorrow," I said. She didn't move right away. She looked around the forge, the banked coals, the tools racked on the wall, the horseshoes hanging in rows by size, the way some people look at a church and some people look at a junkyard, and I couldn't tell yet which one she was. "You're Caleb Doss," she said. "I am. I'm Nora Hatch. I bought the Pelham place." I'd heard. Everybody had heard. A widow from back east paid cash for the Pelham spread, which was 40 acres of decent grass and a house that needed a new roof before winter. People had opinions. They usually do about a woman alone with money. I kept mine to myself. "Bride'll be ready by noon," I said. She nodded and went out. That was the first time. There were maybe a dozen times after that before anything shifted. She'd come in with something that needed work, I'd do the work, she'd pay and go. She wasn't chatty and I wasn't either. She didn't ask questions that weren't about the job. I respected that. Most people fill silence because it makes them nervous. She didn't seem nervous. She just seemed like someone who'd learned not to waste words. It was September when she came in with a gate hinge that had sheared off its bolt. Brought the whole hinge, which told me she knew enough to know I'd need it. I was in the middle of a shoe reset on a big roan gelding that belonged to Porter Eubanks, and I told her it'd be an hour. She said fine, and sat down on the bench outside the forge door without making a production of it. Porter was talking the whole time the way Porter always talks, about the price of beef, about the railroad coming or not coming, about who owed who what, and I was only half listening because the roan was tender on that near hind, and I was paying attention to where I put my weight. But at some point, Porter said something about the Pelham place, and I heard him say, "That widow," in the particular way men say it when they want everyone to understand they find the situation amusing. I didn't say anything, neither did she from outside. But when I came around the horse to the other side, I could see her through the open door, and her jaw had gone tight in a way that meant she'd heard it too. Porter rode out. I went to the door and she handed me the hinge. I looked at the shear. Clean break bolt had been undersized for the gate weight to begin with, somebody's short corner a long time back. "Whoever put this in originally used the wrong bolt," I said. "That's what I thought." She paused. I didn't know enough to be sure. I went in and found the right stock. She followed me in a few steps, watching. "How long have you been doing this?" she said. "Smithing, since I was 14. She was quiet a moment. "You grew up here?" "Came here at 22. Grew up in Missouri." "What brought you west?" I thought about it, not because it was complicated, but because I hadn't said it out loud in a long time. Same thing that brings most men. Thought there was something here I couldn't find back home. Was there? I was working the bolt now, cutting thread. "Some of it," I said. She didn't push on that. I finished the bolt, seated it right, handed her the hinge. "That won't shear again," I said. "Next thing to go will be the wood." She almost smiled. "Thank you." She paid and left, but she paused at the end of the lane and looked back once, and I don't know what she saw. The town had a particular understanding of me by then. I'd been in Cutter's flat 16 years, and in that time I'd done what Smiths do, kept the horses shod, the wagon wheels rolling, the tools sharp enough to work with. I charged fair. I didn't drink to excess or start trouble or run a tab I couldn't cover. But I wasn't a man of position, the way the town counted position. I didn't own the mercantile or the feed store. I didn't sit on the water board. I lived in the small house behind the forge, and I ate alone most nights, and I'd been doing that long enough that people had stopped thinking it was temporary. My wife had died 11 years before, fever, the summer of '71. We hadn't been married long, 3 years, and she was 26 when she went. Her name was Ruth. I don't talk about Ruth because there isn't much to say that makes it smaller. She was a good woman and I loved her, and she died, and that was that. I kept working. That's all you do. People tried for a while. There were women put in front of me the way you'd show a horse a new bit hoping it'll take. I was polite. I wasn't interested. After enough years they stopped trying, and I became, in their accounting, a man who'd had his chance and let it pass. The blacksmith. Not unkind. A little hard to know. Useful, certainly. But used up in the way that some men go used up, when life takes the soft parts and leaves the rest standing. I knew what they thought. I didn't argue with it. Most of it wasn't wrong. Nora Hatch came back one Thursday in October with a broken spoke and a list of other small things. She had the list written on paper, which I appreciated. Most people explain it to you 3 times and still forget half of it. I read the list. Spoke, yes. A clevis pin that had wandered loose. 2 S-hooks she needed custom. A question about whether I could look at her plow blade, which had a hairline she'd found running along the shoulder. You can leave it all, I said. I'll get to it by Saturday. I don't have another wagon. I'll bring it out when it's done. She looked at me. You do that? If it's not too far. It's 4 miles. That's not too far. She thought about that, like she was checking to see if there was something in it she hadn't seen yet. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. All right, she said. I went out Saturday with her wagon and the other parts in a sack, and she was up on the roof when I pulled in. She had a man named Lewis working for her, older fellow, good worker. I knew him, and he was handing boards up and she was nailing them down, and she had a nail in her teeth, and she looked down at me and said, "Just leave it by the barn," and went back to her nailing. I unloaded everything. Lewis gave me a nod. I looked at the house. She'd gotten a good section of the south face done, fresh timber bright against the weathered old. She worked like she'd done it before, even strokes, no wasted motion. I left without making a thing of it. But driving back, I thought about the list written on paper. The hairline she'd spotted on the plow shoulder. The way she'd looked at the hinge break and known something was wrong even if she hadn't known exactly what. She paid attention. That's not as common as people think. November came cold and early. The first real snow hit the second week, and it was a hard one, 6 inches overnight, and wind that packed it into the lee sides of everything. I spent 3 days digging out and catching up on work that had stacked while I was dealing with it, and it was the middle of the 4th day before I got out to check on anything beyond my own lot. The widow Belcher, south end of town, needed her stovepipe bracket reset. The snow weight had pulled it from the wall. The Garza brothers needed chains looked at before they lost a wheel on the mountain road. I made the rounds and was heading back when I passed the turnoff to the Pelham place and saw, a 1/4 mile down the lane, Nora's wagon tilted at the kind of angle that meant one wheel had gone into a drift-covered ditch. I turned down the lane. She was already there, working a fence rail under the axle as a lever. She'd gotten the wheel half out and was using her body weight against the rail and not quite making it. The snow was up past her boot tops. Her breath was coming hard. I got down, got my shoulder under the rail beside her. She didn't say anything, just shifted to give me room. We worked together for a moment, found the rhythm of it, and the wheel came up and out of the ditch with a lurch that put us both sideways. She straightened, pushed the hair back from her face, looked at the wheel. Not cracked, she said. No, just the snow. We were both standing there breathing. She looked at me, and there was something slightly amused about it, about the two of us in the middle of this cold, empty road up to our shins in snow. Thank you, she said. I was passing. You weren't, you came down the lane. There wasn't anything to say to that, so I didn't say anything. She drove on. I watched until the lane curved and she was out of sight, then I went back to the road. It was the first time she'd called me on something. I thought about that on the drive home. Not the being caught at it, I didn't mind that, but the directness of it. No coyness, no pretending it was something else. Just, you came down the lane, true, and she said it. The thing I should explain about the land is that I didn't talk about it because there was nothing to talk about, to my mind. It started the year after Ruth died. I was working and saving in a way that maybe looked like grieving and maybe was something to put the hands to. And land was cheap in certain valleys east of town, good grass but no water developed, and the water was the question. You could buy 50 acres for almost nothing if you were willing to take the water risk. I bought the first parcel in '72, spent 2 years and every dollar I had over operating costs to put in a well and a series of shallow catch basins along the creek that ran the eastern edge. By '74, the water was reliable. By '75, I bought the next parcel north, where the creek bent. By the time Nora Hatch came to Cutter's Flat, I held 6 parcels, about 840 acres total, running from the East Creek Bend to the edge of the high pasture, where the Kellerman family ran cattle on a lease I charged them fairly for. I also held a note on the Ames mill, which had been struggling since old Ames died, and his son had no head for it. I'd taken the note at a fair rate, not to collect, but because if the mill went under, the whole valley lost the only grinding operation within 30 miles, and that was bad for everyone. I never mentioned any of this, not because I was hiding it but because it hadn't come up. A man's holdings aren't something you announce. You know what you have, you tend it, and the rest of it is nobody's business until it is. The forge was the work I loved. The land was the work that had kept my hands busy while my heart figured out how to keep going. I didn't think of them as the same thing. She came to a church supper in December. I was there because me Calloway, who organized such things, was impossible to refuse. She'd been feeding me at her table once a month for a decade, and she extracted church supper attendance as the price of that. Nora sat 2 tables away with the Garza family, who were the first people in town to treat her like she just lived there and always had. I respected the Garzas. She laughed once at something Amelia Garza said, a real laugh, not the polite kind, and I noticed that I noticed it. After the meal there was the usual milling around, and Porter Eubanks said something to his friend Hollies near the door. I didn't hear all of it, but I heard enough. And the way Hollies looked toward Nora when Porter said it told me enough about what I'd missed. I went over. I wasn't going to make a thing of it. I just went and stood near them, and Porter turned and saw my face and stopped talking. Hollies looked at his boots. Evening, I said. Caleb, Porter said. That was all. They drifted off toward the coffee. I didn't have to say anything else, and I didn't. Nora was watching from across the room. She'd seen it, all of it, or enough of it. I went back to my table, and me Calloway put more pie in front of me without being asked. Later at the door, Nora passed me putting on her coat. She stopped. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know. She looked at me a moment with those clear eyes. Thank you anyway, she said. And she went out. It was February when she came in with her horse, a bay mare who'd thrown a shoe on the frozen road and cut the heel slightly on the ice. The cut was minor but needed cleaning. The shoe I could reset. I did both. The mare was good under my hands, calm, which told me something about how she'd been handled. She's well-mannered, I said. She's the best thing I brought from back east. Nora was watching me work. She was my husband's horse. He taught her and then he died and she came to me. I didn't say anything for a moment, just kept working. How long ago? I said. 4 years. I nodded. People keep waiting for me to be done with it, she said, not bitter, just matter of fact. Like grief has a schedule. It doesn't. No, she was quiet, you know that. I did. I looked up from the hoof. She was looking at me in the way she sometimes looked at a piece of broken tack, directly, trying to understand the thing. 11 years for me, I said. She nodded slowly. And you stayed here after. This was home by then. Was it easier, having the work? I thought about that honestly. I don't know if easier is the right word. The work kept the days from running together, gave each one a shape. She was quiet for a while. The mare shifted. I finished the shoe. I think that's why I fixed the roof myself, she said. It wasn't that I couldn't have paid someone. I stood up. I know. She looked at me. Something moved in her face just briefly. Then she paid for the mare and took her out. I won't pretend I didn't know what was happening. I'm not a young man, and I'm not a fool. By March I knew I was waiting for her on the days she didn't come in, and I'd stopped waiting for things a long time before that, and the fact of it surprised me in a way that was almost uncomfortable, like a joint you'd forgotten could moving. But I was clear-eyed about what I was. She was a woman with her own land and her own money and her own clear way of seeing, and I was the blacksmith. I didn't have illusions about how that penciled out. I just kept working and kept being honest with her when she came in, which was the only thing I had to offer that I was sure of. In March, she came in on a Tuesday with nothing that needed fixing. I looked at her. I was passing, she said. I almost laughed. I didn't. I said, you weren't. You came down the alley. She looked at me for a moment. Then she did laugh, the real one I'd heard at the church supper. It changed her face. I was glad to be the reason for it. She sat on the bench inside the door, the first time she'd sat inside, and we talked for an hour about nothing consequential. The price of hay, a book she'd read over the winter, whether the spring was coming early or late based on the snowmelt at the high pasture. I told her what I'd seen up there. She told me what she'd seen on the low ground near the creek. She left saying she'd be back. She was. We were married in June. I want to be careful about how I say this because I've seen men my age talk about second marriages, and they make it into something it isn't, some great dramatic rescue, some proof of life. It wasn't like that. It was quiet, and it was deliberate, and neither of us went into it with any confusion about what we were or what we'd been through. I asked her on the bench outside the forge, which felt right. I didn't have a speech. I told her that I'd valued every conversation we'd had, that I thought she was the clearest-eyed person I'd known in a long time, that I didn't have much to offer beyond myself and the work and whatever that was worth. I told her that I didn't expect her to need saving, and I wasn't trying to rescue her from anything. I just wanted to be in the same life as her, if she was willing. She was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was thinking something through, not stalling. That's the best thing you could have said, she told me. We married in me Calloway's back garden with the Garzas and the Belchers and old Lewis, and 6 other people who'd been kind to one or both of us. The preacher made it short, which we'd asked for. There was food after. Nora wore a blue dress the color of the sky that morning, and she stood next to me with her shoulder touching mine the whole time like it was the most natural place to be. She found the deed box 3 weeks into July. I had it in the house, the actual house, the one behind the forge where I'd been living alone for 11 years. She was moving her things in, finding where everything went, and I was in the kitchen and I heard her stop in the back room where the box was. I came to the door. She was standing with the box open. Not going through it, she'd opened it to see what was inside, and she was looking at the top deed, which was the original parcel from '72, and I could see her reading it. She turned and looked at me. I didn't say anything. I waited. She looked back down at the box. There were 6 deeds, The mill note. Records of the lease payments from the Kellermans, which were substantial by now, carefully recorded in a ledger I'd kept for years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was real. It was solid. "Caleb," she said. "Yes." "How much of the valley is this?" "Most of the East Bench. 800 and some acres. The mill note, which I don't intend to call in, they're steady and it's good for the town." She was quiet for a moment. I came into the room and stood near her, not close enough to crowd her. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't." She looked at me. I couldn't read her face exactly, not then. It was a lot of things at once, and I let it be all of them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Not accusatory, genuinely asking. I thought about how to say it right. Because I didn't want you to have to wonder whether that was why I was asking, and I didn't want to wonder whether it was why you said yes. She was still for a long moment, looking at me. Then she set the deed box down and took one step and put her hand flat against my chest, right over the sternum, and held it there. "I said yes," she said, "because of what you told me on that bench." I put my hand over hers. "I know," I said. She stood there with her hand against my chest, and I could feel my own heartbeat under her palm, and neither of us moved for a while. Outside the window the summer light was long and gold, and somewhere out on the East Bench, the Kellerman cattle were moving in the grass that I'd bought dry and made water run through, and kept for 10 years against the possibility of exactly this. A future I hadn't been able to name, tended in the dark against the day I might need it. I hadn't known it would be her, but I'd kept it all the same. She was angry that evening. I want to be straight about that. Not at me exactly, or not only at me. At the men in town who'd known or half known and had looked at her differently for it and never told her. At Porter Eubanks in particular, who she now understood had been laughing at something she hadn't been let in on. "They knew you had the land," she said, sitting at the kitchen table. "Some of them, it's not something I talked about. But they knew, and they thought." She stopped, pressed her lips together. I understood what she was thinking. That she'd come in as a widow with some money and a broken-down spread, and the men in Cutter's flat had looked at her and thought things. And all that time, the quiet blacksmith she'd come to for repairs had been, what? More than they'd told her. "Whatever Porter thought," I said, "it wasn't about you. It was about me. He's always had trouble with the idea that I'm not what I appear." She looked at me. "What do you appear?" I thought about it. "Used up," I said. She shook her head once hard, like I'd said something wrong. "You don't appear that to me," she said. "You never did." I looked at the table. The grain of it, an old table, Ruth's table that had been in this house for years. Nora's hands flat on it now. "You came in for a broken bridle keeper," I said. "A 20-cent repair. You could have gone to the leather shop in Millhaven. It's closer to your place. Someone told me you were the best." "Louis?" "Yes." I nodded. "When I fixed it," I said, "what did you think?" She considered. "That you'd done it before. That you knew exactly what it needed and no more." "That's most of what I am," I said. "I see what things need and I do that. I don't do more than what's needed and I don't do less." She was looking at me. "I know," she said softly. "I know that's what you are." She reached across the table and took my hand. Not a gesture, just a fact, her hand in mine, matter of fact as everything she did. "I'm not angry at you," she said. "I'm angry that they underestimated you and thought I would too." I turned her hand over in mine. The calluses on her palm, from the roof nails, from the rains, from the work she did without making a production of it. "Let them," I said. She looked at our hands. "Yes," she said. "Let them." There was a meeting of the water board in August. I'd been off it for 2 years. I didn't like meetings much, and I'd let my membership lapse, which in a town like Cutter's Flat means you stop being on it. But there was a question of the East Creek diversion that touched my parcels directly, and the board's clerk had written to tell me I should attend. I went with Nora. I hadn't planned to bring her, she just said she'd come, and I hadn't had a reason to say no. The room was full. Porter was there. Hollis was there. The Kellermans who ran cattle on my lease, which most of the room didn't know. Amos Carey, who ran the water board and was a careful man, looked up when we came in and nodded at me with the particular nod he reserved for people who mattered to the proceedings. Porter saw us come in together. I watched him understand it, us walking in together, the way Nora didn't take a separate seat but pulled her chair alongside mine like that was the obvious thing. I watched it move across his face. I didn't look at him again after that. The diversion question came up. I spoke twice, briefly. I knew those creek bends better than anyone in the room. I'd walked every foot of them in the course of putting in the catch basins. I knew where the water went in a dry year and where it backed up in a wet one. I said what I knew. Amos Carey listened and took notes. The board voted in a way that matched what I'd said. Afterward, in the yard outside, I heard Holly say to someone I didn't know, "That's Das. He owns most of the East Bench." Just like that. Like it was something everyone knew and had always known. Nora was beside me. She heard it too. She didn't look at me, just kept walking, her shoulder at my arm. "Outside," she said, "most of the East Bench." "Most," I said. She shook her head again, but she was almost smiling. I've thought sometimes about what I would have been without the land. The working answer is the same. The forge was always going to be enough for me, enough money, enough work, enough purpose. I would have been the blacksmith in the small house and I would have been all right. I have been all right, most of my life, on a great deal less than all right looks like. The land wasn't for me, not exactly. It was for Ruth, in a way, the life we'd planned, the things we'd talked about in the 3 years we had. A place. Something solid. When she died, I kept building it because I didn't know what else to do with the plan, and eventually it became its own reason and I stopped thinking about why I'd started. Nora understood that when I told her. She sat with it a while, the way she sits with things, and then she said, "I think you kept it for the same reason I kept the mare." I thought about that. The mare that had been her husband's, that she'd brought across half the country. To have something of what was supposed to be, I said. "Yes." She reached up and put her hand along my jaw then, her thumb at my cheekbone, and looked at me directly the way she looked at things she was trying to understand. I held still under her hand. "I'm glad you kept it," she said. "So am I said, "now." The fall was long and warm that year. We worked the place together through September and October, her parcel and mine, which by then had started to feel like one thing even though the deeds still read separate. We talked about whether to fold the Pelham land into a single holding, and we talked about the Kellerman lease, and we talked about the mill note and what to do with it when old Brennan finally had to sell. But mostly we just worked, and talked while we worked. And I found out that years of eating alone do something to you. They make the sounds of another person in a house feel almost startling at first. And then, after a while, they feel like something you'd forgotten you were missing. One evening in late October, I was on the porch watching the light go out of the sky over the high pasture, that long purple gold that comes some evenings in autumn and doesn't last. Nora came out and stood beside me, and I put my arm around her and she leaned into my side. She looked out at the pasture. "Is that yours?" she said, "the high ground? Up to the ridge?" She was quiet. "I never thought," she said, "when I came out here with 40 acres and a roof that needed fixing." She stopped. "What?" "That I'd feel like this about a place." "Like what?" She thought about it. "Like it belongs to me, not just the deed, like it knows me." I understood that. I'd felt it about the first parcel, standing in the middle of it in a dry August in '72 with nothing but grass and the sound of the wind, and the understanding that this was mine and I'd made the water come. It was a feeling you couldn't buy. You had to earn it in time. "It will," I said. "Give it another year." She turned her face up and looked at me. In the last of that light, her eyes were the same color as the sky going dark. She had a smear of something, paint or mud. I couldn't tell, along her jaw, and she hadn't noticed, and I didn't tell her because it was the kind of thing I liked knowing. She put her hand flat on my chest the same way she had in the back room that July evening, the deed box behind her, the news settling. "You know what I keep thinking about," she said. "What?" "You on that bench in June, what you said. That I didn't have much to offer. That you wanted to be in the same life as me." She pressed her hand slightly. "That was the whole thing, that was it." I covered her hand with mine, the same as before. The high pasture went dark. The first star came out over the ridge, and I stood there with my hand over hers and the whole east bench under our feet, and I thought, she came in for a broken bridal keeper. She stayed for the man fixing it. She married him thinking he had nothing, and she'd thought that was enough. That's what I think about, on the days when I need to remember who I am. Not the land, not the deeds in the box. Her, in February, standing in the cold with her shoulder against that fence rail, working the lever without asking me to, just shifting to give me room when I got there. That's the whole of it. The rest is just good land, well tended, with a woman on it who sees what it is. And me, who finally let someone see me too.